The rain unexpectedly started that afternoon, drenching me before I could even think about finding cover. I had been hanging out with my friend Sarah, just killing time when the sky opened up. Mom wasn't expecting me back until much later, probably after dinner, but with the heavy downpour, I decided to return home. I pulled my hoodie tighter as I hurried down the driveway. Dad's car was gone, which wasn't unusual, since he had been traveling a lot for work recently. He always claimed it was for business, but I sometimes wondered if there was more to it. Mom had been acting strangely, more distant lately, and as I unlocked the door, something felt off. The house wasn't as quiet as I had anticipated. Instead, I could hear soft music coming from the living room. A strange scent filled the air. Not the floral fragrance Mom usually wore, but something heavier and sweeter. I closed the door softly, my wet shoes squeaking on the wooden floor. I wasn't sure why, but I felt the urge to move cautiously, to be silent. Then I heard it: laughter. Not just any laugh, but Mom's, light and carefree. There was another voice to a man's, low and warm, blending with hers. I stood frozen, trying to understand what I was hearing. Dad wasn't supposed to be home until the weekend. So who was this man? My curiosity took over, and I crept closer, my heart pounding as I reached the archway to the living room. I appeared inside, and my stomach dropped. Mom was on the couch, leaning toward a man I didn't recognize. He was lounging next to her, one arm draped over the back of the couch, his fingers brushing her shoulder. They seemed so comfortable together, laughing as if they had known each other for years. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. This wasn't just a casual chat. It was something more, something intimate. I must have made a sound because Mom turned and saw me standing there. Her eyes widened in shock, and her smile faded, like she had been caught doing something wrong. "Emma," she whispered, her voice shaky. The man looked over at me, his expression calm, as if nothing unusual was happening. He wasn't embarrassed or apologetic, just mildly curious, as if wondering what I was doing there. A lump formed in my throat. My hands clenched into fists as I tried to control my breathing. Who is this?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. Mom stood up quickly, smoothing her blouse, as if that would somehow change what I'd just seen. "Emma, it's not what you think," she said, her tone hurried. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. "You have 5 seconds to explain," I muttered, my voice tight, stretched thin with anger. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my mom and my family began to shatter. Mom stood frozen like a child caught stealing cookies, while the man beside her stayed calm, like he had no reason to feel guilty. His relaxed stance only made my frustration burn hotter. "I can explain," Mom stammered. Wringing her hands, the composed woman I knew was gone, replaced by something that looked a lot like guilt. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is he, Mom?" I demanded, narrowing my eyes at both of them. The man smiled, as if this were all just some awkward misunderstanding. "I'm Leo," he said casually, as though that explained everything. Leo, the name, meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, like we were all supposed to be fine with this, made my skin crawl. I turned back to Mom, my heart pounding in my chest. "Leo who?" I asked Mom. "What's going on here?" She stepped closer, reaching out as if to comfort me. But I took a step back, not wanting her near me. Not after I had seen how easily she leaned into him, like they belonged together. "He's just a friend," she said, her voice shaky. "A friend," I repeated, my words dripping with disbelief. I wasn't stupid. Friends don't sit that close or laugh like that. Leo stood up, slowly brushing imaginary lint from his shirt. "Look, Emma, this really isn't what it looks like," he said smoothly. "We were just talking." I shot him a glare. "Talking with your arm around her?" I snapped. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" Mom's face flushed, and I saw panic settle in. "Emma, please," she whispered. "It's complicated." "Your father and I interrupted sharply. "Don't you dare drag Dad into this." I spat. She winced as though I had slapped her, but I couldn't stop. My mind raced, recalling moments that seemed innocent at the time. The nights Dad was away, the secret phone calls, the new clothes she had started wearing. It all made sense now, and the realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You're cheating," I whispered, The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but saying them out loud made it all too real. I hated how small my voice sounded. Mom's lips parted, but no words came out. Her silence confirmed everything. Leo looked at her, then back at me. Clearly uncomfortable now, maybe I should go. He muttered, grabbing his jacket from the couch. I stepped aside, giving him a clear path to the door. Yeah, I think you should, I said. He hesitated for a moment, as if waiting for Mom to say something. But she just stood there silent and pale. Finally, he shrugged and walked past me, giving me an awkward nod on his way out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. I turned back to Mom, my chest tight with anger and hurt. How long? I asked, my voice cracking. How long has this been going on? Mom looked down, her hands trembling. It's not what you think, Emma, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Your father and I, things haven't been right for a while. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. So this is your solution? Sneaking around with some random guy while Dad's out of town? Mom's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked small, like someone who didn't know how to fix the mess she had made. I stood there waiting for her to explain, but all I got was silence, the kind of silence heavier than any words. Mom lowered her head, ashamed, but it was too late for guilt. The damage was already done. How could you do this? I asked. I murmured, my voice trembling with disbelief. To Dad, to me. Mom rubbed her temples, clearly overwhelmed. Emma, it's not as simple as you think. I let out a bitter laugh. Simple? You were hugging another man on our couch, Mom. What part of that am I missing? Her eyes filled with tears, and she tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't bear her touch right now. You don't understand, she pleaded, her voice breaking. It's been complicated with your father for a long time. He's always traveling, always working. And I just what? I snapped, got bored, and decided to replace him. Tears streamed down her face, and I could see her struggling to keep herself together. But my anger couldn't be contained. It was louder than the sadness I knew would come later. It's not like that, she whispered. Your dad and I barely talk anymore. We've been pretending for years. I crossed my arms, feeling an odd sense of betrayal, not just towards Dad, but towards the version of our family I thought was real. So you just gave up, didn't even try to fix it? Mom shook her head, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. I did try, God, Emma. I tried so hard. But your dad. She paused, struggling to find the words. He's not the same anymore. He's distant. It's like he's married to his job. Not me. Her confession hurt. I knew Dad was gone a lot, but I had always convinced myself it was temporary, that things would improve. I never imagined Mom had been overwhelmed by loneliness all this time. But still. So you decided to cheat instead of telling him how you felt? I asked, my voice accusing. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she admitted, her shoulders sagging. Leo was just someone I could talk to. It started out innocent, the first, swear I never meant for it to become more. I wanted to believe her, but the image of her and Leo sitting so close, laughing, like they didn't have a care in the world, flashed through my mind. And what was tonight? I asked bitterly. Just talking again, she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The truth was already clear in her face. She didn't need to say anything. I paced around the room, trying to make sense of it all. Does Dad know? I asked, though I already had a feeling about the answer. Mom shook her head slowly. I was going to tell him eventually, but I didn't know how. I stopped and stared at her, incredulous. So, you were just going to keep sneaking around until you figured it out? Her silence answered me loud and clear. The weight of it all hit me. How my family was nothing like I thought. How everything we built was falling apart. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of where to go next. You have to tell Dad, I said quietly, my voice more steady now. He deserves to know. Mom's face twisted with pain. For a moment she looked like she might argue, but then she nodded, defeated. I know, she whispered. I will. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. If you don't, I will, I said firmly. Her eyes widened with fear. Emma, please no, she said, but I interrupted her. I can't live with this, I said. You have until Dad comes home, or I'll tell him myself. Mom collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. She looked so small, so broken. But I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. Not right now. I turned and walked toward the stairs, each step heavier than the last. I needed to be alone to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do now that the truth was out. But as I reached the top of the stairs, one thought kept echoing in my mind. How did we get here? How did everything go so wrong? The next few days felt unbearable. I kept my distance from Mom, avoiding her as much as I could. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies again, and every time I saw her, the anger inside me grew. At the same time, I knew the clock was ticking. Dad would be home the next day, and the truth had to come out. Whether she told him or I did, there was no avoiding it. Late that night, as I lay in bed scrolling mindlessly through my phone, I heard a soft knock on my door. I froze, dreading the conversation I knew was coming. Emma, Mom's voice was barely audible. I sighed. There was no point pretending I wasn't awake. Come in. She stepped inside, her expression exhausted and full of pain. She cautiously sat at the edge of my bed, unsure if I would push her away. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I'm going to tell your father, she whispered, breaking the silence. I nodded, though the nod in my stomach tightened. Tomorrow, she said, her voice shaky. As soon as he gets home. I stared at her, trying to understand what that would mean for all of us. The version of our family I'd always believed in was already gone. But hearing her admit it to Dad would make it final. You waited too long, I muttered, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. I know, she whispered, wiping her eyes. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could handle it, but I didn't. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. What are you going to say to him? I'll tell him the truth, she replied, her voice thick with emotion. He deserves that much. We sat there in the dim room, the silence between us heavy but not as sharp as before. For the first time, I could see how much this was hurting her too. Mom wasn't just the villain I had painted her as. She was someone who had made a terrible mistake and now had to face the consequences. I'll be there when you tell him, I said quietly. Her eyes widened. You don't have to, Emma. This is my burden, I know, I replied, but I want him to hear it from you. And I want him to know I already know. Mom nodded, her lips trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. The next day came too quickly. The sound of Dad's car pulling into the driveway made my heart race. Mom stood by the door, pale and visibly shaking, as Dad stepped inside, smiling and carrying his bags. Mom and I exchanged a glance. Hey, what's with the serious faces? Dad chuckled, setting his keys down. Mom took a deep breath, her hand gripping mine tightly. It was time to shatter the illusion. No matter what happened next,